Okay, and our last section here on the academic paper. This one is even shorter than the last because I just want to introduce the material to you. First up, what are the sections of the academic paper? The abstract, the introduction, the method, the results, the discussion, and the references. Okay, that's it for this section. Hope you have a great. No, just kidding. Let's actually describe what these are for you, and I'll give you some tips on how to read academic papers so that it's not terrible. First up, the abstract. The abstract is a one paragraph, sometimes two paragraph summary of what a academic paper is telling you. It usually includes kind of all of the other sections in a shorthand method, and the abstract should tell you everything you need to know to be aware of whether you want to read the article more. Sometimes they tell you the whole bit of the article and you really don't need to read more of it. Sometimes they can tell you what the outcome of it is. Most of the times they'll tell you essentially the research question and then the results and anything else you need to understand those two things. But there can be more to the abstract. Whenever you look at the title of a paper and you think that it might be something you want to read, the next thing to read is always going to be the abstract. Next up, the introduction. The introduction is the part of the paper that describes all of the information you need to know before you get to the actual research paper. We'll talk more about the introduction, methods, results, and discussion sections in a later section, but I do want to just introduce them to you now so you have some idea of what you're working with. A good way to think about the introduction is that it should take you from your broad research topic that everyone can understand, like does the internet make people more forgetful, all the way down to the specific research question. Uh, so what information would you have in between there? Well, they would describe how things are operationalized. They would describe previous research that is related. They would talk about why the research is important, who the research affects, what things that they are aware of as confounds, and what things that they're aware of as control variables. They may even describe the designs that research usually takes for this area of investigation. Next up, the method is going to tell you, very much like a lab report, what happened in the study. The method is a really important place because it's really where most of your confounds are hidden. So if you look at the title, look at the abstract, and they tell you this is what we found, you're going to want to double check that information in the method because usually what gets found is something that gets brought back to the theory. But what actually happened is more specific, and so you're working with inferences in your conclusions versus what actually happened in your method. Like I said, this will make more sense as we go through the semester, but I just want to give you a brief introduction now. The results section, very much as it sounds, and what is the results of the data that was gathered based off of the method described in the method section, and usually that's going to involve some complicated statistical analyses. When I was learning to read papers, the results section was the last thing that I would read normally, just because I didn't have enough experience in data and analysis to understand what they were saying. It's probably the hardest section to read in the entire paper, and especially for newer students, I would not recommend trying to read the results very much at all. If you're ever going to skip any section, skip the results. Uh, Next up, the discussion. The discussion section uh, should do two things. Number one, summarize everything else in the paper. And number two, tell you what the results were and give you everything that you need to know to understand what the results mean. What stuff is going to be included in there is also well, it's going to include a limitation section. They're always going to talk about what things happen in the study that may make the results invalid, what concerns people might have about the study. They're also going to talk about future direction. So what's the next thing they want to research? They're going to talk about why the research was important. Often they'll talk about what they found and try to put those results into context using research from other places that people have already done. I would say that if you are going to read the paper, the best order to read a paper in, especially if you're new at reading papers, would be the title, then the abstract, and then the discussion, and then maybe the introduction and or methods, and really probably skip the results. Why? Because that's kind of the order of how easy it is to understand the information, and that's also kind of the order of how important the information is going to be. Finally, the references section, that's your bibliography. If you find that they reference a research paper or something else that you want to find in the paper somewhere, you'll go get it in the references section. Pretty dang straightforward. You'll have an assignment this week to look academic paper and just answer some straightforward, simple questions about it. I would encourage you to not try super duper hard, but instead focus on just getting used to reading a paper and pay attention to where you find the most useful bits of information. Every academic paper is going to be different, and it really is almost like different authors have different styles. But every academic paper is going to follow this order of writing. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow it, but this does help provide some structure for the paper. Okay, that's it for this week's material. Please make sure you go through the activities. Let me know if you have any questions on the activities or any concerns. Feel free to pop that in the chat or send me an email, and I'm happy to work with you on that. This is the first week we're really going to start putting in some time and effort on these activities, but I really don't want you to spend more than, say, 4 or 5 hours on all the stuff that we're working here. And I promise you that sometimes students will take an academic paper, the first one they ever are given, and they'll spend 10, 15 hours trying to read it and memorize it and learn all of that stuff. You don't want to do that. I would say try to spend 1, maybe 2 hours on the academic paper assignment for this section, with the idea that we're going to look at academic papers a couple of times throughout the semester, and you'll get better at reading them, and ideally you'll get to a point where you can kind of look through them in just a couple of minutes and find what you're looking for. Alright, hope it's been an interesting set of material, and I hope you have a wonderful week. I'll see you next time.